Welcome to Swai Files. I am Swai. The night had fallen, but the 5 boys had not yet returned. The howling wind across the cold Alps sounded like a call from another world. In the pitch-dark night, there was nothing to be heard but a terrified scream. Then everything sank into silence. The next morning, the searchers found only footprints that stopped in the deep forest, and everything disappeared without a trace. 11 years later, skeletal remains emerged from the cold earth, with strange markings on the bones. Who or what pulled them into that eternal darkness? The truth about that day, it seemed, was not something that only humans had a hand in. Returning to the year 1994, back to the beautiful capital of Austria. The capital with its ancient architectural structures. But about 30 kilometers to the west, a completely different scene awaited. The majestic peaks of the Alps rose like massive natural walls into the sky, drawing in those who loved adventure. In the spring, when the snow began to melt and the sunlight returned, the mountains became alive with rare and mysterious wildlife. Among them was the salamander, the fire salamander, a unique amphibian that only those patient enough could find. On the morning of April 15, 1994, 5 boys from a small village near Vienna decided to explore the Alps, despite the warnings from their parents not to go alone. Driven by curiosity and a thirst for adventure, the 5 children planned to climb to search for salamander eggs. The group consisted of Simon Bauer, the oldest at 14, his younger cousin Anton Engel, who was only 11 but just as bold, Lucas Wagner, the best climber in the group, and the twins Felix and Maximilian, who always brought laughter to the group with their pranks. Originally, the group had 6 members. Jakob Fischer, Simon's best friend, was supposed to go too. However, Jakob was stopped by his parents before the trip. They refused to let him go so far in just one day. Jakob watched his friends prepare with a sad look, his eyes full of regret as he saw them carry climbing sticks, water bottles, and egg containers. There was nothing Jakob could do but watch. "See you guys before dinner." Simon smiled, patted Jakob on the shoulder, and then the group left. None of them realized that it would be the last time Jakob saw his friends. The group planned to be back by lunchtime, but the Alps were not easily conquered. Although not very tall, the mountain was surrounded by complex trails, dense forests, and sharp rocks. As they walked, the 5 boys played, unaware of the darkness waiting ahead. Their laughter echoed through the valley as they moved deeper into the forest, approaching the caves where the salamanders lived. Noon passed without a sign of the boys. At first, their parents assumed they were caught up in their games and might return a little late, but as evening approached, anxiety started to creep in. As the night fell, lights came on in the village houses, but their children were still nowhere to be seen. The weather turned cold, and their worry grew. When the clock struck 7 p.m., a heavy silence enveloped the village. Simon's parents were the first to leave their house, fear in their eyes as they gazed towards the dim mountains. They quickly gathered the other families, and soon everyone was together, deeply worried. Fathers brought flashlights, wooden sticks, and thick coats, while the mothers wept and prayed that their children were just hiding somewhere in the forest. The search began with calls echoing through the trails of the Alps. They searched in vain, passing through every tree, searching under every rock, but there was no trace of the boys. Darkness engulfed the forest, amplifying their fears with each passing minute. Fathers called out their children's names, listening intently, but only the howling wind and rustling leaves responded. They tried to reassure themselves that the children were simply playing and would soon return. But by midnight, there was still no sign of the 5 boys. The thick darkness seemed to tighten its grip on their hope. Something had happened, and the fear surged like an unstoppable wave. By now, they knew this was no longer child's play. The 5 boys were truly missing. On the first night, The thick darkness covered the Alps, cold wind blowing through the trees, bringing an overwhelming sense of unease. The villagers from the small village near Vienna gathered at the foot of the mountain with flashlights and fragile hopes. They were used to children being late after playing, but this time, as the night grew darker and there was still no sign of the boys, a deep worry engulfed everyone. Their names were called from all directions, but only the sound of the wind and the ominous forest responded. The search began that very night. Flashlights flickered in the darkness, sweeping through leaves and rocks on the mountainside. Each step up the mountain was filled with uncertainty and a fear that something terrible had happened. They called out each child's name: Simon, Anton, Lucas, Felix, Maximilian, but only echoes from the desolate mountains replied. There was no sign of the boys. The mountain seemed to have swallowed them into its deep darkness. As dawn approached, the initial hope began to fade. Tired eyes, trembling hands holding dim flashlights, but their determination remained undiminished. Still, no clue was found. A dreadful silence enveloped the mountain. By the next morning, when there was still no news, the local police were called in. At first, they believed that the boys were simply lost and would soon return. The police chief, an experienced man used to minor incidents, reassured the families not to worry too much. But when half a day had passed without any trace of the boys, the police realized that this was no ordinary disappearance. On the afternoon of April 16th, a larger-scale search was launched. Police and rescue teams from nearby areas were deployed. Helicopters flew over the mountain peaks, shining lights onto trails and steep cliffs. Specially trained dogs were brought into the dense forest to track any clues. With modern technology and support from many people, it seemed the boys would soon be found. Strangely though, despite a thorough search throughout the day, no trace of them was discovered. In the following days, the search expanded to more distant areas, deserted valleys, and isolated spots around the Alps. Every rock, every crevice was scoured, but all that remained was cold silence. The mountain seemed to have hidden every trace of the 5 children. As the search went on, witnesses began to speak up. Some said they saw the 5 boys heading towards the mountain that morning, with boxes and sticks in hand. They recalled the boys' laughter echoing through the valley. Another student, Klaus Schmidt, told the police that around 11 a.m., while he was also hiking with a group of friends, he heard a terrified scream from a distant corner of the mountain. Klaus said the scream sounded very different from playful shouts he usually heard. However, too frightened, he didn't dare approach, and the scream faded away afterward. The police recorded every statement, but no concrete clues emerged. Contradictory information from witnesses only increased confusion and suspicion. The Alps, with their majestic beauty, had now become a mysterious and terrifying maze. As the search dragged on with no results, worry and despair began to take over. The families of the 5 boys couldn't sit still. They decided to print thousands of flyers and posted them all over Vienna and surrounding areas, asking for the public's help. Posters with the boys' photos were hung on telephone poles, train stations, bus stops, and even on cafe doors. The desperate questions about their whereabouts spread everywhere, but all efforts were met with silence. Vienna, usually a peaceful city, was now filled with rumors and suspicions. The story of the disappearance gradually became a hot topic in cafes and newspapers. People began speculating about what could have happened in the Alps that day, but the truth remained shrouded in darkness. The search continued for many more days, but with each passing moment, fragile hope gradually extinguished. Those who once believed the children were merely lost now began to fear that they might never return. And like a curse of the mountain, the cold Alps stood there, refusing to reveal any of its secrets. 11 years had passed since the day 5 boys disappeared without a trace in the Alps. The long stretch of time seemed to erase the hope of parents who once believed their children would return. But on a fateful day in August 2005, a gruesome secret buried deep within the mountain unexpectedly surfaced. On August 12th, a middle-aged man named Eric Miller, an experienced mountaineer, decided to take a solitary journey on some of the lesser-known trails in the Alps. He had heard about the disappearance of the 5 boys long ago, but Eric never imagined that this trip would make him a witness to a horrifying truth. While hiking through a desolate area, Eric paused to rest. His hiking stick accidentally struck something hard beneath the soil. Curious, Eric knelt and began to dig through the thin layer of earth, his heart pounding as a tattered piece of cloth emerged. It was not just any cloth. It had been there for years, decaying but still intact. Eric dug deeper, and soon he was shocked to discover a human skull lying beneath his feet. Fear filled Eric, but he managed to stay calm and called the police. The area was immediately cordoned off, and an investigation team arrived on the scene. The police did not expect to uncover such a horrifying truth after 11 years of searching for the 5 boys. As investigators continued to excavate, they found 4 more skeletons stacked together, all belonging to young adolescents. The bones had been buried in a shallow pit, and the boys' clothing was removed and bound in a peculiar manner, as if someone had intentionally arranged everything. Nearby, under a large boulder about 150 meters away, they found the 5th set of remains, lying apart from the others, hinting at a mysterious separation. The markings on the skulls shattered the initial theory of an accident. 3 of the 5 boys had large fractures on their skulls, wounds that could not have been caused by a simple fall or collision. These signs suggested that they had been brutally murdered, while the other 2 skeletons showed no visible signs of injury, leading to suspicions that they may have been strangled or died from another cause. A chilling silence enveloped the investigation team as they examined the scene. Despite the passage of more than a decade, the horror of the case remained intact. The public was shocked, the media rushed to cover the story, and the disappearance of the 5 boys once again became the center of discussions. The police quickly began investigating all possible angles. The initial theory suggested that the boys might have had an accident while climbing. But the skull fractures and the way the clothing was tied did not support this. It seemed that someone, or perhaps a group of people, had deliberately staged and concealed the boys' bodies. Another theory emerged that the 5 boys could have encountered a dangerous stranger while searching for salamanders in the forest. Perhaps it was a random murderer who suddenly attacked and brutally killed them. But the question was, why? What was the motive? There were no signs suggesting it was a robbery or a personal vendetta. Everything was too mysterious, too baffling. An even bolder theory suggested that the culprit could have been someone known to the victims. This person might have lured the children to the remote area, using force to subdue and kill them. But if this were true, why had there been no signs of such a plot over the past 11 years? And how had the perpetrator managed to conceal such a heinous act for so long? The story grew even more intriguing when the police discovered over 10 empty shell casings near the scene. This led to another theory. The boys might have been accidentally shot during a military training exercise. However, upon close examination, the skull injuries did not match those caused by bullets, and there was no evidence indicating that the children had been shot. The more the investigation progressed, the more complex and confusing the case became. The signs of violence, the tied clothing, and the unusual way the remains were buried all divided public opinion regarding the perpetrator and the motive. What really happened on April 15, 1994? What led to the death of these 5 innocent boys? The Alps, once majestic and serene, had now become a cold grave, harboring a grim mystery. Theories followed one another, but no clear answers emerged. Even though the truth had begun to surface, the case remained shrouded in the darkness of unanswered questions. The investigation stretched on for years after the discovery of the remains of the 5 boys. But like an impenetrable dark veil, every lead gradually slipped out of the police's grasp. In 2005, when the boys' remains were found, public outrage erupted, and pressure on the investigation force increased sharply. The police promised to bring the case to light, but the Alps seemed to hold deep secrets that no one could decipher. The police force, along with investigators, refused to give up. They re-examined every detail of the disappearance, every theory about what happened on the mountain that day. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the remains, but they could not come to a definitive conclusion regarding the cause of death of the 5 boys. The skull fractures, the peculiar way the clothing was tied, and the mysterious burial of the remains all left questions unanswered. The victims' families would not give up. They repeatedly called on the police to investigate further, but over time, their fragile hopes began to fade. Every theory had been considered, from the boys being killed by a serial murderer to an accident while hiking or even a secret military experiment. However, there was no concrete evidence to support any of these theories. The case gradually fell into a deadlock, and darkness once again enveloped the Alps, where all answers remained elusive. Then, on a controversial day, a famous psychology professor named Peter Gruber from the University of Vienna proposed a shocking theory. He suggested that the father of one of the victims was the killer. Professor Gruber argued that the murder might have stemmed from a family conflict or some psychological pressure, and he believed the father had killed the group of boys in an emotional outburst. His theory was based on psychological studies of family violence and similar cases in the past. This accusation was like a lightning bolt from the sky, shaking the community and infuriating the victims' families. Especially Simon Bauer's father, one of the 5 victims, was heavily criticized by the media and the public. The man, who had endured the pain of losing his child for 11 years, now became the target of groundless suspicions and accusations. He vehemently denied all accusations and demanded a thorough investigation to prove his innocence. Despite the media pressure, the police had to proceed with investigating Professor Gruber's theory. They searched the homes, re-interviewed family members, and scoured all documents that could be relevant. However, no evidence supported Gruber's theory. The pieces of the case still did not fit together, and his theory was soon dismissed. Nevertheless, public opinion was deeply divided. Some believed that Gruber was mistaken, while others still harbored doubts, thinking there might be secret elements being concealed. The families of Simon and the other boys not only had to face the pain of their loss, but also had to endure heavy social pressure. Things became worse as newspapers continued to revisit Gruber's theory, sparking an endless wave of suspicion. Even so, no new clues emerged. The investigation hit a dead end, and efforts to find the killer gradually faded away. The police, despite doing everything they could not make further progress. Press conferences grew fewer and fewer, and the case sank into silence. As the months passed, Vienna returned to its usual rhythm, and the story of the 5 boys became a distant memory, only mentioned occasionally in passing conversations. Newspapers that once ran major headlines about the case had moved on to other topics. The victims, families, their hearts still scarred, were forced to accept that justice for their children might never be realized. Yet for those fathers and mothers, hope, no matter how small, never faded. They still believed that one day the truth would be revealed. But until then, all they could do was continue with their lives, with the lingering pain in their hearts and memories of the beloved children they had lost forever. The case, one of Austria's most mysterious, gradually sank into oblivion. No one knew what really happened in the Alps that year, and the mountains still stood there, silent, like a sentinel, guarding the dark secrets yet to be unveiled. 13 years had passed since the remains of the 5 boys were found in the Alps. The case seemed to have faded into oblivion, becoming a tragic story blurred by time. However, in 2018, a new wave of interest in the case suddenly emerged on social media forums. A post quickly went viral with a shocking theory. The culprit could be a teacher at the school the 5 boys attended. The author of the post, claiming to be a former student of the school, declared that at the time of the disappearance, one of the teachers had exhibited suspicious behavior. This person claimed that the teacher had often scolded and threatened students and had a potential history of using violence against them. The post also alleged that this teacher had led school excursions to the Alps and was very familiar with the terrain. This theory immediately sparked a wave of heated debate and controversy. More posts followed, with some affirming that they had heard about the suspicious teacher, while others dismissed it as baseless rumors. However, public pressure forced the police to reopen the case once again and consider the theory regarding the teacher. The police quickly investigated, but after only a few weeks, the theory was dismissed. There was no evidence linking the teacher to the case, and his whereabouts on April 15, 1994, were proven not to match the boys' disappearance. Despite this, the spread of the theory once again reignited public interest in the case that had long been forgotten. The case became the focus of prolonged debates on social media and even in real life. Many people continued searching for new clues or attempted to reconstruct theories based on fragmentary details they collected. Some believed the incident could be related to an undiscovered kidnapping. Others suspected military involvement, as there was a military shooting range near the scene. Some even proposed the bold idea that the boys had encountered a serial killer who had escaped without leaving a trace. The longer the debates dragged on, the more obscure the case became. Criminal investigation experts got involved, attempting to reanalyze the scene and clues from old evidence. But, as before, nothing clear emerged. The case had become a tangled web of theories without any concrete evidence to support them. Everyone seemed to have their own version of what happened in the Alps on that fateful day. But the truth remained buried beneath layers of earth and time. The disappearance of the 5 boys left a profound scar not only on the victims' families, but also on the local community and the entire nation of Austria. For years, the silent pain of the parents permeated their daily lives. Even though the case remained unsolved, the image of those innocent children still lingered in the minds of people as a symbol of injustice and mystery yet to be unveiled. Whenever another disappearance occurred, or when a mysterious case was revealed, the story of the 5 boys was brought up again. The newspapers, even after many years, continued to dig into what had happened, as if hoping that somehow the truth would finally emerge. The Alps, now a place forgotten by most but still full of rumors, stood like a silent guardian over the dark secrets it refused to reveal. Meanwhile, the victims' families, despite the years of pain, still held on to a small glimmer of hope. They believed that with advances in science and modern forensic technology, the hidden truths might one day be uncovered. But, regardless of the ongoing public discussions and emerging theories, the case stood there like an abyss, its depths unfathomable. When night fell over the Alps, once a paradise for adventurers, an unusual silence enveloped the place, as if the mountain was holding tight to what it had witnessed. Unanswered questions, unfulfilled promises of justice, and the unending sorrow of the bereaved, all blended into a mysterious veil not easily lifted. And so, the case of the 5 boys missing in the Alps remains one of the unsolved mysteries, haunting an entire nation, awaiting the day when the truth will finally come to light.